The first time the fence broke, it was an accident. That much was true. A storm had rolled through the valley on a Thursday night in late October, the kind that comes low and mean off the ridge, bending the old cottonwoods sideways and pulling shingles loose from rooftops that had survived 20 years of weather without complaint. By morning, 3 sections of the cedar picket fence separating Nora Calloway's property from the one next door were flat on the ground, pressed into the wet grass like they'd simply given up and decided to lie down. She'd stood on her back porch with her coffee going cold in her hands, looking at the damage, calculating the cost of replacing it, calculating whether she even cared enough to replace it at all. She'd lived alone on that property for 2 years, moved out from the city after her marriage ended in the quiet, grinding way that some marriages end. Not with a fight or a revelation, but with 2 people slowly realizing they'd become strangers who shared a lease. She'd taken the dog, a brindlemutt named Hatch, and a truck full of boxes, and she'd driven until the buildings thinned out and the sky opened up, and she found a small house on 3 acres outside a town called Marin. Population just under 4,000, where she knew exactly no one, and that felt like the right amount. The fence had been there when she bought the place. Old cedar, some of it grayed to silver, some of it still holding its reddish tone. It ran along the back of her property and down one side, separating her land from the neighbors. She'd never met the neighbor. She'd seen lights on over there, seen a truck in the driveway some mornings, and gone other mornings. But in 2 years, she had not once made the walk to the property line to introduce herself. That was the deal she'd made with herself when she moved to Marin. She was not going to be the kind of person who needed people. She was going to be the kind of person who was fine. So, she was looking at her broken fence and doing the math on whether to call someone about it when she heard boots on the wet grass behind her, coming from the direction of the downed sections, and she turned around. He was carrying 2 of the fallen pickets under one arm, work gloves tucked into the back pocket of his jeans, a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow despite the cold. He was maybe 40, maybe a few years either side of it, with the kind of face that looked like it had spent a lot of time in weather. Not handsome in any obvious way. Handsome in the way a well-used tool is handsome, functional, proportioned, built for a purpose. He stopped when he saw her looking at him. "Storm got your fence," he said. "I can see that," she said. A pause. He set the pickets down upright, leaning them against the section that was still standing. "I'm Cal," he said. "I'm next door." "Nora," she said, "I've got some extra cedar in my barn. Same age as yours, roughly. It'd match close enough." He looked at the downed sections, not at her. "Takes maybe an hour to set it right." She looked at him. She looked at the fence. She looked back at him. "I wasn't going to ask you to do that," she said. "I know," he said. That was the first conversation they ever had. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. He fixed the fence that morning while she was inside pretending to work, and when she came out at noon to check, it was done. 3 sections standing straight. The new cedar lighter than the old, but close enough that you'd only notice if you were looking. He'd cleaned up the debris, too. She stood there in the cold noon light and felt something she didn't have a clean word for. Not gratitude exactly. More like the mild disorientation of having someone do something for you before you decided whether you wanted it done. She didn't go over to thank him. She told herself she'd do it later, and later became the next day, and the next day became a week, and then it felt too late to bring it up without it being strange. So she didn't. She let it go quiet the way she let most things go quiet, and she went back to being fine. That was October. By December, a second section had come down. She found it on a Sunday morning, the ground hard with the first real cold, the pickets scattered like matchsticks. She stood there looking at it, and she thought about the storm, but the thing was, there hadn't been a storm. There'd been wind the night before, sure, but nothing that should have taken down cedar posts set in concrete. She walked the line, looked at the base of the fallen section, crouched down and looked at the post. It had been loose enough that the wind had finished what time had started. She filed this information away, went inside, and started looking up the number for a fencing contractor in Marin. She was still on the phone, on hold, when she heard the sound of a truck pulling into the driveway next door, a door opening, boots on gravel, and then the particular sound of someone working. The solid rhythm of a post driver, the scrape of a shovel. She hung up the phone. She stood at her kitchen window and watched Cal set a new post in the frozen ground, working with the patient efficiency of someone who had done this kind of thing so many times it no longer required thought. Hatch sat by the back door watching him too, tail moving in a slow, considering wag. She went outside. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. He looked up. He had a smear of dirt on his jaw. "I know that. I was going to call someone." "You can still call someone," he said, "but the post's already in." She stood there. The cold was sharp, and the light was that particular winter white that flattens everything and makes distances hard to judge. She watched him tamp the post, check it for plumb, tamp it again. "You want coffee?" she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. He looked at her. Something shifted in his face, not quite a smile, but in the neighborhood of one. "Yeah," he said. "I'll finish this first." She went inside and made coffee, and stood at the counter for a moment with her hands flat on the cold tile, breathing. She was not reading anything into this. He was a neighbor doing a neighbor thing. She was offering coffee because it was cold, and he was working. This was not a thing. This was just what people did. He came in 20 minutes later, knocked the mud off his boots at the door without being asked, left them on the mat. He took the coffee she handed him and wrapped both hands around the mug and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the fence. "The posts are old," he said. "Some of them are still solid. Some of them aren't." "How many aren't?" He considered. 3, maybe 4 more. She looked at him. "So it's going to keep falling down?" "Sections of it," he said. "Yeah, eventually." She looked out the window at the fence, at the new post, pale against the old ones, at Hatch nosing along the base of it, leaving a trail of breath clouds in the cold air. "I could just take it down," she said. "The whole thing." Cal turned his head and looked at her, and there was something in that look she couldn't quite read. Not alarm. Something quieter than alarm. "You could," he said. She didn't take it down. She didn't do anything. She drank her coffee, and he drank his, and they stood at her kitchen window in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which surprised her, because silence with people she didn't know was usually uncomfortable. He finished his coffee, set the mug in the sink without being asked, and said he'd keep an eye on the rest of the posts. "You don't have to," she said. "I know that," he said. He left. She stood in her kitchen for a long time after the sound of his truck faded. Hatch came and sat on her foot, which was his way of checking in. She reached down and scratched his ear and told him it was nothing, and Hatch looked up at her with a particular expression of a dog who has already decided he disagrees. January passed without incident. The fence held. She thought about Cal less than she expected to, or told herself she did, which is a different thing. February brought a cold snap, the kind that splits wood and heaves the ground, and on the 14th of February, which she noticed only because it made her feel something she refused to examine, she found a section of fence down on the far back corner of the property. She stood looking at it in the early morning gray. The post was cracked clean through at the base. Frost heave, probably. The ground pushing up against the concrete footing until something gave. She went inside and texted the number she had saved in her phone under the name Cal Fence, which was the name she'd given it, because naming it anything else felt like making a decision she hadn't made. The section is down again. Back corner. The reply came in under 3 minutes. "I'll come by after work." She stared at the message for longer than she needed to. Then she put her phone face down on the counter and went back to work. He showed up at 5:30, the light already gone, working by the beam of a headlamp he'd clipped to the brim of his cap. She watched from the window again, this time without pretending she wasn't watching. Hatch was out there with him, circling at a respectful distance, and at some point Cal reached into his jacket pocket and produced what appeared to be a dog treat, which he offered flat-palmed without making a production of it. Hatch took it with great dignity and went and sat nearby, monitoring the work with the air of a supervisor who had decided the contractor was acceptable. She went out at 6 with 2 mugs of coffee. He looked up, took the mug. "You've been watching," he said. "I have a window," she said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Fair." She sat on the back step and he worked, and they talked for the first time about things that weren't the fence. She learned he'd grown up in Marin, left for 12 years, come back. She didn't ask why he came back, and he didn't volunteer it, and she understood that there was a story there that wasn't being told yet. She told him she'd come from the city, that she'd needed somewhere quiet. He didn't ask why, and she didn't volunteer it, and she understood that he understood that there was a story there too. "You like it here?" he asked. "Marin." She thought about it honestly. "I like that nobody needs anything from me." He looked at her. "That's a strange thing to like. Is it?" He went back to work. "Most people like being needed." "I know," she said. "I used to be one of them." He didn't say anything to that, just worked. The headlamp threw a circle of light on the fence post and the frozen ground in his hands, and outside that circle, the dark was complete, and the stars were very bright. And Nora sat on the step with her cold coffee and thought that this was the most comfortable she had felt in 2 years, which was alarming, and she pushed that thought down into the place where she kept the other thoughts she wasn't ready for yet. He finished, packed his tools, whistled once softly to let her know he was leaving. She raised her hand from the step. "Cal," she said. He turned. "Thank you," she said. Actually said it this time. He nodded, got in his truck. She sat on the step until the taillights disappeared, and Hatch came and sat beside her, and they both looked at the dark for a while. March came in warm, which nobody trusted. The old-timers in Marin said a warm March always meant a late frost that would kill everything you'd been foolish enough to plant early. And they were usually right. Nora had not planted anything early. She had not planted anything at all in 2 years, because planting things meant believing you'd be there to see them come up, and she'd been careful not to believe that too hard. She started going to the hardware store in town. This was not a new thing. She went when she needed things. But she started going more often, and she started noticing what was in the fencing section, the weight of cedar versus pine, the gauge of wire, the way a good post anchor was designed. She told herself this was practical. She was a homeowner. She should understand her property. She bought a book on basic fence repair and read it at the kitchen table one evening while Hatch slept on her feet, and she got about 40 pages in before she put it down and sat there in the lamplight being honest with herself for a minute. She was not learning to fix fences. She was finding reasons to have things in common with her neighbor. She closed the book. She got up and poured herself a glass of water and stood at the dark window looking out at the fence, the line of it barely visible in the moonlight, still standing, all of it. She almost wished it would fall down. She caught that thought and looked at it and put it back carefully. The way you put back something fragile that you've picked up without meaning to. The fence held through March and into April, when the lilacs along the back of her property came out in a rush, and the whole yard smelled like something from a memory she couldn't quite place. She'd been in the garden. She'd started finally a small garden along the south wall of the house, just herbs and a few tomatoes, nothing that required commitment. When she heard Cal's truck, and then his voice, not calling to her, but talking to someone. She straightened up and looked over the fence and saw him in his driveway with a girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, dark-haired, in rubber boots that were too big for her. The girl was carrying a paper bag and appeared to be arguing a point with great conviction. Cal listened to the argument with the patience of someone who had been losing arguments to this particular person for years and had made his peace with it. He said something. The girl said something back. He looked up and saw Nora watching and raised a hand. She raised hers back. The girl looked over too, direct, unafraid, the way children look at things before they learn to pretend not to be looking. Then she said something to Cal that Nora couldn't hear, and Cal said something back, and the girl picked up her bag and walked to the fence. "Hi," the girl said. "Hi," Nora said. "I'm Wren. He's my uncle. He talks about your fence a lot." Nora looked over the girl's head at Cal, who had developed a sudden interest in something in the bed of his truck. "Does he?" Nora said. "He says it's old cedar, and it's actually pretty good quality, but the posts were put in wrong originally, so they're heaving." Wren delivered this information with the gravity of a structural engineer. "He knows a lot about fences." "I've noticed," Nora said. "Do you have a dog?" "I heard a dog." Hatch materialized at the fence line as if summoned, and Wren's face did the thing that children's faces do when they see a dog they want to touch. A kind of full-body brightening. "That's Hatch," Nora said. "Can I pet him?" Nora looked at Cal, who was now watching with his arms folded and an expression of careful neutrality that didn't quite conceal the fact that he was paying close attention to all of this. "Come around," Nora said. Wren came around the fence and spent 20 minutes with Hatch in the way that only children and dogs can spend time, with complete mutual absorption, no agenda, no self-consciousness. Nora sat on the back step and watched, and Cal came around eventually too, standing at the edge of the yard with his hands in his pockets, and they watched Wren and Hatch together without talking much, and it was the most natural thing that had happened to Nora in longer than she wanted to count. "She's your brothers?" Nora asked. "Sisters," Cal said. "She stays with me some weekends. Her mom works. She's something." "Yeah," he said. The word landed with a weight that told her the story wasn't simple, and she didn't push. Wren looked up from Hatch. "Your fence is crooked," she announced, pointing at the section nearest the house. Cal and Nora both looked at the section in question. "It's not crooked," Cal said. "It is a little," Nora said. Cal looked at it more carefully. He walked to it, crouched, sighted along the top rail, stood up. "Told you," Wren said, and went back to Hatch. Cal looked at Nora. She looked at him. Something passed between them in that moment that neither of them named, the particular amusement of two people who have been caught out by a 9-year-old and are choosing to find it funny rather than embarrassing. "I'll take a look at it," he said. "I know you will," she said. He came back the following Saturday, and she had coffee ready before he knocked, which she noticed and he noticed, and neither of them mentioned. By May, the fence had become a running thread in their lives, the way a song becomes a running thread. You don't decide to keep hearing it. It's just there, woven in. He came by on a Saturday morning to check the posts along the back line, and she came out with coffee, and they walked the fence together for the first time, side by side, Cal stopping to test each post with his hands, Nora watching and learning what to look for. He showed her how to tell a heaved post from a rotted one, how to read the way the wood had moved. She asked questions, and he answered them without condescension, the way someone answers who is genuinely interested in passing on what they know. She started to see the fence differently, not as a problem or a boundary, but as a record of weather, of time, of the particular way this piece of land had been cared for and neglected in turns. Some posts were solid as the day they'd been set. Others had been fighting the ground for years and losing slowly. She could read it now, the way you learn to read a landscape once someone shows you what to look for. You could replace the whole thing, Cal said, stopping at a post that was listing maybe 5 degrees from plumb. Start fresh, new materials, set right. What would be the point of that, she said. He looked at her. It's got history, she said. Some of it's still good. He looked at the fence for a moment. Then he looked at her. Yeah, he said. Some of it is. She felt the warmth of that land somewhere in her chest, and she looked away at the lilacs, which were past their peak now but still holding some color, and she breathed through it and said nothing, and he said nothing, and they walked the rest of the fence line in a silence that had weight and texture and warmth. June. The section she'd been watching, the one near the old apple tree, where the roots had been working against the footing for years, came down on a Tuesday night. She heard it go. She was lying in bed in the dark, and she heard the soft collapse of it, the picket settling into the grass, and she lay there for a moment with her eyes open, and she was smiling, and she knew she was smiling, and she let herself. She texted him in the morning. The apple tree section finally went. She watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. "I'll come by Saturday." She put her phone down and went to make coffee, and Hatch watched her from his bed in the corner with an expression of mild but patient vindication. She spent the week in a state of low-level restlessness that she recognized as anticipation and refused to call by its name. She cleaned the house, which she did anyway. She baked bread, which she did sometimes. She sat on the back porch in the evenings and watched the gap in the fence where the apple tree section had been. The open space of it, the way you could see straight through to his yard now, the barn, the corner of his porch, the old metal chair he kept out there. She had never been able to see his porch before. She sat with that for a while. Saturday morning he came at 9, truck loaded with cedar, and Wren was with him. Wren had apparently decided that fence repair was an activity she wished to supervise, and she set about this role with great seriousness, positioning herself where she could see everything and offering commentary. Nora brought out coffee for Cal and a glass of juice for Wren, and Wren accepted the juice and then said, "Do you have any of those crackers? The ones with the seeds?" Nora looked at her. "How do you know about those crackers?" "Uncle Cal said you always have good snacks." Nora looked at Cal, who was very focused on measuring a board. She went inside and got the crackers and a jar of honey and set them on the back step, and Wren sat down with the gravity of someone settling in for the long haul. Hatch positioned himself nearby, alert to the possibility of cracker crumbs. Cal worked, and Nora helped. She'd been practicing with the tools, quietly, on her own, and she could now drive a post and set a rail without making a mess of it. And Wren narrated, and Hatch supervised, and the morning went by in a way that felt, to Nora, like something she'd been waiting for without knowing she was waiting. At noon they sat on the porch and ate sandwiches she'd made, and Wren told them at length about a book she was reading about a girl who trained horses, and Cal listened with his full attention, the way he listened to everything. And Nora watched him listen and felt the thing in her chest that she'd been carefully not naming for months, doing something she could no longer ignore. After lunch, Wren went to throw a ball for Hatch and Cal, and Nora sat on the porch steps in the warm June light, not talking, the way they'd gotten good at not talking together. "She likes it here," Cal said. "I like having her here," Nora said. He was quiet, then. "She doesn't warm up to people fast." "Neither do I," Nora said. He looked at her. She looked at her hands, at the small calluses that had formed on her palms from the work she'd been doing, the garden and the fence work, and the general labor of maintaining a place you decided to stay in. "You've been practicing," he said. He'd noticed the quality of her work that morning. "A little," she said. "You don't need me to come fix things anymore," he said. The tone was neutral, careful. She looked up at him. He was looking at Wren and Hatch in the yard, his face composed, giving nothing away, but his hands on his knees were still in the way hands are still when someone is waiting for something. "The fence is going to keep needing work," she said. "It's old cedar. The posts were put in wrong originally." He turned his head and looked at her. "I know," he said. And that was as close as they came that day to saying the thing. But it was close enough that something settled between them, some long-held breath released, and when Wren came back with Hatch and announced that Hatch could catch a ball in the air now, and had they seen that, they both said yes. They'd seen it, and they were both still smiling when they said it. July was hot, the kind of heat that turns the valley floor into a shimmer and makes the ridge look like it's floating. Nora's garden was doing better than she'd expected. The tomatoes especially, big and sprawling and needing to be staked, which she did on a Thursday evening in the long summer light with her hands in the dirt and Hatch sleeping in the shade of the house. She was focused on a particularly stubborn tomato cage when she heard Cal's truck and then his boots on the gravel and then nothing, which meant he'd stopped. She looked up. He was standing at the fence, leaning on the top rail, watching her. "You're getting good at that," he said. "At what?" "Staying," he said. She looked at him. The light was going gold, and the shadows were long, and he was leaning on the fence she'd watched him build and repair and tend for the better part of a year. And she understood suddenly that he'd been watching her the way she'd been watching him, not with calculation, but with the careful attention of someone who has been hurt before and is trying to learn whether it's safe to try again. She stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. She walked to the fence. They were maybe 3 feet apart, the fence between them. "I planted things," she said. "You plant things, you're staying." "I know," he said. "I've been here 2 years, and I never planted anything until this spring." He looked at the garden, at her. What changed? She put her hand on the top rail of the fence. His hand was there too, not touching hers, close. "I don't know," she said. Something stopped being broken. He was quiet for a long moment. The heat was still in the air, but the worst of the day had passed, and the light was doing something beautiful to the ridge behind his property, going amber and deep. "I owe you a thank you," she said, "for all of it. The fence, the posts, all those Saturdays." "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Cal." He looked at her. "Why did you keep coming back?" she said. "Honestly." He looked at the fence, at his hand near hers on the rail. He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer, and she had made her peace with that, had decided to let it go, when he said, "Because you never asked me to stop." She looked at him. He looked at her. "That's a low bar," she said. "For some people," he said. "Not for you." She understood what he meant. She understood that he'd seen her, from the beginning, the woman who didn't need people, who'd built a life around not needing people, who'd stood on her back porch with cold coffee and looked at a broken fence and started calculating whether she even cared. He'd seen that, and he'd shown up anyway, quietly, without pressure, leaving her every exit she might need. She turned her hand over on the rail. He looked at it. He put his hand over hers. The light went gold, and then amber, and then the first soft purple of evening, and they stood at the fence with their hands together on the rail and didn't say anything else for a while, and the silence was the best thing that had happened to either of them in longer than they could easily account for. Hatch came over and sat on Nora's foot. "He does that," she said. "I know," Cal said. "He does it to me too now." She looked down at Hatch. "Traitor," she said with great affection. August was the month everything shifted from slow to real. Not with drama. There was no drama, which was part of why it worked. It was the accumulation of small things. The way she started leaving the back door unlocked on Saturdays. The way he started bringing Wren every time instead of sometimes. The way Nora found herself cooking for 3 without deciding to. The way it just happened that there was enough for 3. The way the table felt wrong when it was only set for 1. Wren had appointed herself the official inspector of fence repairs, a role she took seriously enough to have developed opinions about specific tools. She had also, somewhere in the course of the summer, started treating Nora's kitchen as an extension of her uncle's house, opening the refrigerator with the casual authority of someone who belongs, sitting at the counter with her book while Nora cooked, asking questions about the herbs growing in the garden and the names of the birds that came to the feeder Nora had put up in June. One Saturday afternoon in August, Wren was sitting at the kitchen table drawing something, and Nora was making iced tea, and Cal was on the back porch checking a post that had started to list, and Wren said, without looking up from her drawing, "Are you and Uncle Cal going to get together?" Nora set down the pitcher. "Wren." "I'm just asking," Wren said, "because he's happier when he comes here, and you're happier when he's here. I notice things." "You do notice things," Nora said. "So are you?" Nora looked out the window at Cal on the porch, crouched at the post, his back to the house. She looked at the fence line, the long cedar run of it, new and old wood side by side, the places where repairs had been made, and the places that were still original, the whole thing imperfect and standing. "I don't know," she said honestly. Wren looked up. "That means yes," she said, with the certainty of someone who has not yet learned to complicate the obvious. Nora laughed. It came out fuller than she expected, the kind of laugh that surprises you, and she put her hand over her mouth, and Wren looked pleased with herself and went back to her drawing. And outside, Cal turned at the sound of the laugh and looked through the window at Nora, and she looked back at him. And she didn't look away. That evening, after Wren had been collected by Cal's sister, a brief, warm woman named Darro, who shook Nora's hand and said she'd heard a lot about her and gave Cal a look of cheerful significance that he ignored with practiced dignity. After Wren had gone and the dishes were done and the long August evening was settling into dark, Cal and Nora sat on the back porch and the conversation went somewhere it hadn't gone before. He told her about the 12 years he'd been gone from Marin, a marriage that hadn't worked, a job in a city he'd never felt right in, the particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't know you. He'd come back when his father got sick, stayed after. The house next door had been his parents' house, and he'd bought out his sister's share and stayed. She told him about her marriage. Not the whole of it, not yet, but the shape of it. The way two people can be good people and still be wrong for each other. The way the absence of a fight can be its own kind of failure. The way she'd driven away from that life feeling, not relieved, not sad, but empty in a way that scared her more than either. "You filled it back up," he said. "Some of it," she said. He looked at her. The porch light was on, and the moths were at it, and somewhere down the valley a dog was barking at something in the dark. "Nora," he said. "Yeah," she said. "I'm not going to keep fixing your fence forever without it meaning something." She was quiet. The moths circled. The dog barked. "I know," she said. So, she said. She turned her head and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the space between them was very small and had been getting smaller since October, since a storm and a broken fence and a man carrying cedar pickets across a wet yard on a morning she hadn't been ready for. She reached over and put her hand on his arm. He covered it with his. They sat there in the warm August dark and let the thing that had been building for 10 months settle into them properly, not rushed, not performed, just present. The way the best things settle, not with a crash, but with the quiet certainty of something that was always going to be true, just waiting for the right conditions. September. Wren came back to school and her weekends got complicated, but she still came on alternate Saturdays and treated Nora's kitchen as her own and brought her horse book and a new one about a girl who sailed around the world. And she ate crackers with honey and threw the ball for Hatch and checked the fence posts with the seriousness of a person who has professional standards to maintain. The fence was mostly in good shape now. Cal had worked through it methodically over the course of the year, replacing the bad posts, resetting the ones that could be saved, adding a new section along the back where the old cedar had finally given out completely. It was a fence that had been tended. You could see the history of it. The old silver wood and the new reddish cedar, and the places where the repairs met the original, the seams visible if you looked, not hidden. Nora had stopped wanting to take it down. She had started, in fact, to feel something close to proprietary about it. She walked the fence line on Sunday mornings the way Cal had shown her, testing posts, reading the wood, looking for the slow signs of trouble before they became fast ones. She'd replaced 2 pickets herself in August, done it clean and right, and when she'd shown Cal, he'd looked at the work and said, in the way he said things when he was pleased but wasn't going to make a production of it. And she'd felt more satisfied by that than she'd felt by most explicit praise in recent memory. October came back around. The cottonwoods went yellow, and the mornings got sharp, and the ridge turned that particular blue-gray that meant the cold was coming. 1 year since the storm. 1 year since 3 sections of fence had gone flat in the wet grass, and a man she'd never met had walked across her yard carrying cedar pickets. She was in the garden, pulling the last of the tomato plants, when she heard Cal come around the corner of the house. He stopped when he saw her. 1 year, she said. 1 year, he said. He came and crouched beside her and helped pull the spent plants, and they worked in the cold morning air without talking, the way they worked together now. Easy, unhurried, each knowing what the other was doing without needing to coordinate it. When the garden was cleared, she sat back on her heels and looked at it. The bare earth, the neat rows, the small stakes still in the ground where the tomatoes had been. "I'm going to plant garlic," she said, "before the ground freezes. It comes up in spring." Cal looked at the garden. "That's a commitment," he said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. He reached over and brushed a piece of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. Just that. And she leaned into it for a moment. Just that. "The fence is good," he said. "I checked it last week. All the posts are solid." She looked at the fence, at the long cedar run of it, tended and standing, the seams between old and new visible in the October light. "I know," she said. "So I don't have a reason to come over," he said. The tone was dry. The corner of his mouth was doing the thing. "Cal," she said. "Yeah." "Come over for dinner tonight." He looked at her. "Not because the fence needs anything," she said. "Just because." He stood up, brushed the dirt from his knees, offered her a hand, and she took it, and he pulled her up, and they were standing close in the cold October air, the garden between them and the fence behind her, and the whole year laid out behind them both. "What time?" he said. 7, she said. He nodded. He started back toward the fence line, toward the gate in the section he'd built in August. She had a gate now, a proper one, with a latch that worked, and he opened it and stepped through and then stopped and looked back at her. "Nora," he said. "Yeah." "The fence is going to need work again. Come spring, some of the old sections." She looked at him. She looked at the fence. She looked back at him. "I know," she said. "I'll help." He held the gate for a moment. The light was doing something beautiful to the cottonwoods, that particular October gold that only lasts a few days before the leaves let go. 7, he said. 7, she said. He went through the gate and she stood in her garden in the cold morning and watched him go and felt the full weight of the year, the broken fence and the cold coffee and the headlamp in the dark and Wren's crackers and the moths on the porch and his hand over hers on the rail. Felt it all settle into her like water into good ground, finding the level, finding the rest. Hatch came and sat on her foot. "Yeah," she told him, "I know." She went inside and started thinking about what to make for dinner. Something that took time. Something worth the effort. She had all day, and she was not in any hurry, which was itself a new thing. The willingness to not be in a hurry, to let the good thing take as long as it needed to take. The garlic went in the ground that afternoon, pressed into the cold earth in careful rows. Each clove pointed up the way the book said, covered and tamped and left to do what it needed to do through the winter in the dark. She'd see it in April, maybe May, small green spears pushing up through whatever the winter brought. She was staying. She'd decided. Not the way you decide to stay somewhere when you have nowhere else to go, but the way you decide when you look around at what you've made and what you've been given and what's been quietly, patiently built alongside you. And you think, yes, this, here. The fence would need work in spring. She knew that. Old cedar, some of the posts still original, the ground still heaving and settling in its slow seasonal argument with everything built on top of it. There would be sections down and posts to reset, and mornings with coffee going cold, and the sound of work, and the particular satisfaction of something mended. She was looking forward to it. She was looking forward to all of it. If you've made it this far, and something tells me you have, this is the part where I ask you to hit that like button and subscribe, because there are more stories like this one waiting. Slow ones, quiet ones, The kind where the most important things happen in small moments that you almost miss if you're not paying attention. That's exactly the kind of story we tell here. Subscribe, and you won't miss the next one.